So a while back I made this video looking at the post-World War II mythos and how it shaped our popular culture and our political discourse, how its assumptions are fading away, and how calling political opponents Nazis no longer has the power that it once did, due in large part to overuse. But I neglected the other side of it. What about the people in the political space that embrace it? We've had them on the fringe for a long time. During the war, there was the German-American Bund. In the 50s and 60s, we had George Lincoln Rockwell's American Nazi Party. In the 80s, it was skinheads. Neo-Nazis parading around in brown shirts and swastika brassards on the sidelines is nothing new, but it was always fringe. Now we're starting to have some young, low-level political staffers in the GOP praising Hitler and alt-media personalities getting high-profile interviews for repackaging some of those ideas for present conditions. It's all part of the same dying story process. Because while overuse of Nazi or fascist as a political attack has mostly killed it as a means of criticism, it's also been fetishized as the most anti-establishment transgressive thing anyone can be. If you're young and rebellious, you really want to stick it to the man, the progressive left doesn't have much to offer these days. The schools teach and endorse it, the old media trumpets it, and megacorporations are there to sell you merch to help express those ideas. You can attend well-organized and publicized protest marches praised by national political figures. It's about the most conformist thing you can be. If you want to buck authority these days, you have to go a different route. When I'm talking about future political trends, I'm speaking mostly of Gen Z. And while there's an obvious generational gap of experience here, I can plainly see that for young people in America today, the economics are broken, the social environment is completely batshit, and both political parties are a bunch of decrepit old skeksis that just want you to shut up, pay taxes, and buy into the same line of bullshit they've been spouting for decades. It's a recipe for radicalization. Some go left, but the left is missing something vital, just as it was 100 years ago in Europe. People want to be proud on some level, want to think that their nation is good and that they're part of that. The left, whether communists or today's progressives, tend to call that fascist. Couple that with how utterly insufferable leftists can be, and I see how the right can start to look really appealing. Especially when far right is used to describe everything from genocide to just wanting to be able to buy a house and start a family. It's completely unhinged. So let's get back to the science fiction with a jaunt back to a time when American culture had a much healthier relationship with its World War II myths. A peak example from the 1960s, the Star Trek episode Patterns of Force, where the Enterprise visits the planet Echoes and finds it ruled by Nazis, a regime established by a Starfleet captain, and they're preparing to launch a war of extermination against their neighboring planet. Xeon. Let's just marinate in that for a moment. Not only do we have the story of a Starfleet captain, prime directive, planet-hopping good guys, replicating the Nazis as a viable policy move to save the people of Echoes from their various problems, but it's also notable that this was network television less than 25 years after the war. Nazi Germany was absolutely mythologized at that point, but in some very different ways than today. They're even willing to go for a little comedy.
You should make a very convincing Nazi.
But more substantially, there's a face of the post-war mythos at work here that's largely been forgotten today.
Why that example?
Perhaps Gill felt that such a state, run benignly, could accomplish its efficiency without sadism.
When this was written in the 60s, World War II was still more a matter of lived experience in recent history than the full-on mythologized struggle between caricatured villains that it became over the next 2 decades. As has been pointed out many times before, Gene Roddenberry was a veteran of that war. That generation saw Nazi Germany more as an enemy country than a mysterious land of occult weirdness and gratuitous evil. And there was still some lingering perception of the Nazi economic miracle of the 30s. Many countries at the time, the 30s, not the 60s, wanted to emulate the German economic success that was unfolding. Their policies were delivering growth with low unemployment and low interest rates. Of course, a lot of it was built on bullshit. There was state control of industries to skew pricing in favor of the government, the four-year plan, and financial shenanigans like the MIFO bills that let the government issue bonds through a shell corporation that they could pay large industries with. The MIFO bills could be exchanged for Reichsmarks, but only after they matured, often years later. Industries could pay major contractors with MIFO, but that didn't affect interest rates or taxes much and helped mask rearmament by keeping it partially outside the regular budget. It worked quite well, at least for a while. Had they not gone to war, probably by the end of 41 or so, the German economy would have probably broken with the pressure of its market distortions. Point being that the Nazis actually did improve the German economy for a few years after they came to power, but they did it through chicanery and legalistic games as much as real economic development. It gives you a few good years, and then you have to use a crisis as cover for the consequences. The US and China have both done similar things in recent years, but diving into a policy comparison with Nazi Germany is a fool's errand.
You studied history, you knew what the Nazis were?
Most efficient state Earth ever knew.
It was terribly inefficient, almost 40K levels of ambiguity if you tried to make an accurate org chart. And it was at least in part intentional. It's part of how power was maintained. The more centralized that power and the less bound by tradition and institutional inertia a government is, the more reliant the top man is on making sure all the potential successors are more worried about their rivals than going for the throne. Of course, no one today would point to Nazi Germany as an example of checks and balances, though doing so would be no more daft than claiming it was astoundingly efficient or a singular evil qualitatively different from everything else that ever existed. Especially Stalinists, they're very sensitive about that. Back to that strange bifurcation where, on one hand, the Nazis are treated as immensely more evil than every other murderous authoritarian regime in modern history, but at the same time, a lot of fairly normal things get lumped under the umbrella of Nazi as a way to smear political opponents. Nationalism, anti-communism, anything that can be twisted as being racially biased or motivated. Even proudly displaying national flags. You know who else drank water? Hitler. It's a great hammer to swing at your opponents if you can connect with it, but doing so disassociates it from genocide and wars of conquest to some extent, watering it down to cover everything from border security to having an army to hurting someone's feelings on the internet. It's become completely unhinged from any historical or ideological context, which removes a lot of the stigma by reframing Nazi as just being against the political factions that openly despise you. At which point, anyone can be a Nazi if it serves a narrative, and you shouldn't even consider what a Nazi says, lest you too catch the label by association, which completely misses that trying to understand somebody's perspective is not the same as agreeing with them, but it is a necessary step if you're going to have any kind of a functioning democratic system. So back to another example of how our culture used to be much saner about all this.
Yes, they are Nazis. Your friends are Republicans and Democrats. The Russians are communists. All different, all human. I told you that I must intend to meet the leaders of humankind.
Including the Nazis?
Yes.
Would any television network today make a show, knowing kids would be a large part of the audience, portraying the character who just wants to talk to the Nazis on the same terms as everyone else as the reasonable one? There's a cultural insanity about it today, and the hypersensitivity is actually doing more to fuel an attraction to Nazism than anything actual neo-Nazis could possibly do on their own. The old myths are dying, but myths die hard, and nothing gives them new life like a hysterical crusade to bury them. Which is another reason that Iron Sky, discussed in part 1 of this, is such good satire. It goes after Nazism by openly siding with a Nazi character and making it ridiculous. It's way more effective than trying to shield people from it. This largely came out of a conversation on the Talking History program, and I'll link that episode when it's live. At one point, one of the hosts and I were kind of talking past each other, and we kind of, I think, missed what could have been an interesting point. A few minutes later during the conversation, it occurred to me what I think he meant and how it was part of the same overall idea, but we'd already moved on and were running short of time.